The following program is a special presentation of News 4.
She made me the happiest man.
There was no fence that was too high. There was no pit that was too deep. You know, they could climb over it, climb out of it together or individually, and she's just amazing.
And being there to show each and every one of us in this community, hope. Friends, this day has hope.
And now, News 4 presents Flight 3407 for the families.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Don Postles.
And I'm Jackie Walker. They were mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, and some of the best friends you could ever ask for in life.
And the 50 people who lost their lives when Flight 3407 went down in Clarence Center were also extraordinary people. And tonight, we celebrate their lives. First, Melissa Holmes with a look at what happened. Melissa.
Well, every day we learn more about the victims of the plane crash and more about the crash itself. It could be weeks, months, or even years before we know why Flight 3407 went down. It could be even longer for those who mourn to heal.
260, 2300, call established and cleared out 23 approach, COVID 3407. COVID 3407, Kennedy Tower 120.5. Have a good night.
Continental Flight 3407, Newark to Buffalo. In that last conversation between the female first officer and the tower, the final approach to the Buffalo Niagara International Airport seemed normal. But seconds later, the Bombardier Dash 8 Q400 dropped off the radar.
This aircraft was 5 miles out, and all of a sudden we have no response to that aircraft.
Can somebody get some help for my daughter?
Only 6 miles from the runway, Flight 3407 fell from the sky, landing on a house in Clarence Center. 50 souls perished. The date, Thursday, February 12th. The time, 10:20 p.m. Lives were forever changed.
To me, it looked like the plane just came down in the middle of the house, and unfortunately, that's where Doug was.
I heard my mother make a noise on the phone that I've never heard before.
He booked the earlier flight because he wanted to come home and say goodnight to the kids before they went to bed. But that didn't happen.
The flames burned for hours. When it was finally safe, federal authorities began searching for answers. Through the black boxes, National Transportation Safety Board investigators determined the pilot turned on the plane's de-icing system. It was functioning, but problems persisted.
The crew discussed significant ice buildup, ice on the windshield and leading edge of the wings.
The plane was on autopilot, but then the plane's stall prevention system kicked in, giving control back to the pilot. That's when it began to pitch and roll. Flight 3407 plunged 800 feet in 5 seconds.
I once was lost.
At memorial services throughout the community, thousands have gathered for prayer and for peace. Individuals from all walks of life have become one through unspeakable tragedy.
Try to love our neighbors as we would love ourselves, but today we love our neighbors because we realize that they are ourselves.
Thoughts and prayers from around the world are going out to the victims and their families. But for Western New Yorkers, we know the faces. We know the names. None of us will ever forget where we were when we heard Flight 3407 fell from the sky. It seems out of the wreckage and the deaths, a solidarity has been born, a unity that Western New York has never seen before. Don and Jackie.
Thank you, Melissa. Well, the families who lost their loved ones on Flight 3407 returned to the crash scene this afternoon for the very first time.
News 4's George Rickard is live tonight in Clarence Center with more on that emotional visit today. George.
Yeah, and it's hard to say just how much closure this may have brought for the families. The scene is still there. It has changed, though. There is no recognizable debris, obviously no human remains visible. But still, for about 1 hour today, everything stopped as the families came to see up close for themselves the spot where their loved ones spent their last seconds of life. It was about 12:45 this afternoon when 6 busloads of family members and friends of the victims rolled up to the crash site. as members of the public looked on from 2 blocks away, outside the perimeter on Goodrich Road.
If they get some closure out of it, why, I think it was a good deal.
I can't imagine. I mean, I love my family, and to see something like that, you know, but I mean, I guess that's all they, you know, that's all they could have left to see. So, you know, like I say, God bless them, and my heart goes out to them and their families.
The families spent about an hour there laying flowers just over the fence of the crash scene. Immediately afterward, a few designated members of the media were taken to the site, including only 1 TV camera and local radio reporter Barbara Burns.
Initially, it looked simply like a construction scene. There was a lot of construction equipment, bobcats, cranes, and then once you got close, as close as they let us, and we got within, I would say, maybe 20, 25 feet, you started to realize. It started to set in. You saw the tail of the plane. While I was there, a huge crane took away a large piece, which turned out to be a big part of the engine of the plane. I mean, you keep hearing this word over and over, surreal, and it is surreal.
And we will have more first-hand accounts from people who have seen the site up close. As you see behind me, they are keeping the perimeter enforced here, probably at least until the weekend is what we're hearing. We'll have more later on this hour. Reporting live on Goodrich Road in Clarence, George Rickert, News 4.
All right, George. Well, one woman aboard Continental Flight 3407 was pregnant with her first child.
Family and friends of Jennifer Neal feel cheated. They tell News 4's Rich Newberg they were looking forward to seeing Jen experience the joy of motherhood.
34-year-old Jennifer Neal and her fiancé Todd Ecker were anxiously awaiting the birth of her son. Jennifer perished in the crash, but everyone remembers her spirit.
A beautiful young woman with a big smiling face and just very caring about other people. She was a fantastic person.
Jennifer is remembered here at Women and Children's Hospital, where she worked in the physical therapy department for a while. She had a special way with the children she helped.
As the hours go on after we found out, it's harder and harder.
Mary Pat Battaglia remembers Jen helping this child recovering from spinal surgery.
Jen was able to help her, get up on your hands and knees and crawl around a little bit. That's strengthening for these kids. Get up and kneel at the table. Pull yourself up to standing. And she could get these little ones to work. She could motivate them because it was fun. And Jen was having a good time, and so the kids were having a good time.
As a student at Clarence High School, Jennifer excelled as a musician and an athlete, a strong team leader. Jennifer believed that anything and everything she wanted to do in life was possible, said her family. Every person that she met in life was drawn to her by her grace and inner beauty that was immeasurable. Jennifer went on to work for a drug company, positioning herself in the top 4% of national sales. Her parents said, "She is forever in our hearts and minds."
That was Rich Newberg reporting there. Now, at age 24, Elise Kausner of Clarence was one of the youngest passengers on board Flight 3407.
And many knew her simply as Ellie. But there's nothing simple about this second-year law student who beamed with laughter, love, and life. News 4's Al Vaughter spoke with one of Elise's family members this afternoon. Al.
Before we got the full picture of the deadly crash, before we knew who was on the plane and who wasn't, we heard one name, Elise Kausner, as loved ones put it all on the line to find her that fateful night. Today, hundreds of well-wishers have been filling the clubhouse of Clarence's main park for Elise's wake to mourn the loss of a bright light cut short so suddenly and violently just a few miles away. 24-year-old Elise Marie Kausner, or Ellie as she was affectionately known, graduated from Canisius College and was in the second year of law school. As Ellie's aunt Nancy Houston put it, her niece would have been great as a lawyer or anything she set her mind to.
Was always the life of the party. I almost never saw her without a smile. Just a fantastic young woman. It's impossible even to describe what the world has lost in having her not with us any longer.
Visitation continues tonight until 9 with a memorial service set for tomorrow morning. The family is asking that donations be made to the Erie County SPCA. Don and Jackie.
Thank you, Al. And the crash of Flight 3407 has left a deep hole in the hearts of 9 brothers and sisters from Buffalo.
Mary Pettis was the big sister to all of them, the rock of the family. She was also engaged to be married. For her fiancé, the tragic events of Thursday were the worst possible ending to the love story of his life. Here's News 4's Lori Schultz.
For the friends and family members of Flight 3407, there is shock and sadness as reality sets in. There are also many memories.
She was the friend that everyone wished they had, and she was the person that everyone wished they could be.
Sue Pasha, her father, brothers and sisters gathered to remember 51-year-old Mary Pettis, the oldest of the 10 siblings. The lifelong Buffalonian was a software manager for a healthcare company. She was returning home from a business trip to New York when the plane went down. Her grieving fiancé says everyone who met her fell in love with her. They were to marry this spring.
She made me the happiest man. I'm devastated.
Nearly 2 days after the nation's first deadly airline crash since 2006, air travelers seemed to brush away any fear of flying in boarded flights. However, at New Jersey's Newark, where Flight 3407 came from, some passengers admitted that safety was on their minds.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Unavoidable.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's no way anyone can sit up there and say they're not thinking about that.
Not easy. It's very nerve-wracking. And our son actually was in the Buffalo area, and he would have taken that flight to Buffalo.
Back in Western New York, the mourning continues. Mary's widowed father says it really hit him when his daughter wasn't there to bring him coffee, as she did every day since his wife died.
She brought coffee every morning, and I'm going to miss her. She's quite a girl.
But amid tears are beautiful memories, far stronger than the haunting images of the doomed flight.
Thank you, Lori. And by now, many of us have all heard the story of passenger Beverly Eckert. Like Mary Pettis, Beverly was also a pillar of strength for her family, displaying tremendous faith and courage, especially in the years since the 9/11 attacks, a tragedy that took the life of her husband. And she was returning home to honor his memory. Beverly Eckert's family is trying to cope with tragedy for a second time. Her husband, Sean Rooney, was killed in the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. She was coming to Buffalo to celebrate his birthday with her sisters and to award a scholarship at Canisius High School in her husband's memory.
There was just laughter in her voice. We were just talking all the time over the week, what we were going to do and how we were going to do it.
After 9/11, she became an advocate for the victims' families. Now her family is pulling on her strength then to get through this now.
She said Sean faced death with such calm courage, and it calmed her. We were more visibly shaken than Beverly, who said, I have to be strong. And I watch her, and I think that lesson, what she did there, is allowing us to follow. I keep thinking, how did Beverly do this? I know how she did this. And she gave us a gift because she did this already. She was not afraid of death.
The family is reflecting on Beverly's talents. There's the mug she made, inscribed with the words, do all you can in the time that you have. There are also paintings that she made for her sisters. The family believes she's now reunited with Sean.
I think she's a piece. Yes. And she was not afraid of death. She looked at it as a way probably of being reunited with Sean.
Beverly lived life with vigor and determination. She was an inspiration for all who knew her.
There was no fence that was too high. There was no pit that was too deep. You know, they could climb over it, climb out of it together or individually, and she's just amazing.
Beverly Eckert was held in such high esteem, not just by her family, but by the community and her classmates here at Sacred Heart, who are planning on honoring her this May with the Distinguished Alumna Award. Her life is over, but her legacy lives on. She was recently called to the White House to meet with President Obama, who was touched by her compassion for life.
Tragic events such as these remind us of the fragility of life and the value of every single day. One person who understood that well was Beverly Eckert, who was on that flight and who I met with just a few days ago. You see, Beverly lost her husband on 9/11 and became a tireless advocate for those families whose lives were forever changed on that September day. And in keeping with that passionate commitment, she was on her way to Buffalo to mark what would have been her husband's birthday and launch a scholarship in his memory. So she was an inspiration to me and to so many others, and I pray that her family finds peace and comfort in the hard days ahead.
And many other families also hope and pray for that same peace and comfort tonight.
News 4's Melissa Holmes is joining us again with more stories of lives lost. Melissa?
Jackie and Don, there's the stories of 4 more Western New Yorkers who have left behind husbands, wives, children, and tremendous legacies.
Father, we pray specifically for the families, the individuals that are grieving at this time.
The community is wrapping its arms around those families who have lost loved ones in the crash of Continental Flight 3407. We're learning more about them. There was 44-year-old Dawn Monachino.
Our lives together were just being with each other, being with family, and and our 2 dogs.
Dawn and Michael had been married for 14 years. She and a co-worker were coming back from a business trip with Shearing Plow Pharmaceutical Company when the plane crashed. Michael says he's being strong for her family in Clarence and in Scranton, Pennsylvania.
I can hold it together because, I gotta let people know about this.
There was Dr. Allison DeForge.
The Chinese have a saying that if a marriage is too happy, it can't last too long. She was just a totally devoted mother, a totally devoted wife.
They were husband and wife for 44 years and had 2 children together. DeForge was also a human rights activist and the world's leading expert on the 1994 Rwanda genocide and its aftermath. She was returning home from London that fateful Thursday night, and her last conversation with her husband was about fearing the flight from Newark to Buffalo in the icy conditions.
She knew that it was going to be a rough ride. Unfortunately, she didn't know it was going to be in a plane which probably shouldn't have been flown in those conditions.
It is the hope of Roger DeForge that his wife's legacy will live on in others inspired by her work.
It may be one of the outcomes of this tragedy, that her moral power will be actually greater in death than it was even in life.
The family of Brian Kuklowitz is also mourning. He leaves behind his wife of 14 years, Karen, and their twin sons, who will be celebrating their 9th birthday on Wednesday without their father. The Cheektowaga native who grew up on Buffalo's east side worked as an engineer for Burns Cascade. There was also Darren Talsma of Lancaster, who was supposed to board a later flight.
He booked the earlier flight because he wanted to come home and say goodnight to the kids before they went to bed.
Talsma was traveling with 3 co-workers from Northrop Grumman. His wife, Robin, admits he spent more time at work than at home, but his priorities were clear.
He lived for his kids. They are his pride and joy.
16-year-old Nicole and 19-year-old Darren know that.
His last act was an act of love, so you can't complain there.
How are you staying so strong right now?
Well, being an engineer, my dad was always obsessed with details, and he planned for everything, and he always said, if anything happens to me, he goes, you're the strong one. You're going to be the one that's got to, take the burden on your shoulders.
A burden no child should ever have to bear.
It's okay, because he prepared me for it.
4 completely separate lives now bonded together by tragedy. A community praying together for healing for all.
For these things in your sons.
There was also Susan Whaley of Amherst. She dedicated much of her life to helping others heal through faith and music. She was the cantor at Temple Beth Am in Williamsville and even recorded a CD called Songs of Healing and Hope. The daughter of Holocaust survivors used her infectious spirit for life to reach out to people of all generations.
She had a tremendous ability to teach. She also had a tremendous love for life, a zest for life, one that she shared with everyone she knew.
Friends and loved ones remembered Whaley during a special service at Temple Beth Am on Friday. The impact she made on so many people there and across Western New York also lives on tonight. Don and Jackie.
Thank you, Melissa. And hundreds of Western New Yorkers from all faiths came together this morning to remember the 50 lives lost Thursday night.
News 4's Joe Arena takes us now to a celebration of life and community in Clarence.
Sweet silver song, oh,
For 1 hour, everyone who packed the Eastern Hills Wesleyan Church in Clarence put their differences aside.
That great sense today, we are all one community.
A community searching for one common ground, closure. But even for those responsible for today's prayer service, like Pastor Carl Eastlack, there were even times he didn't have an answer.
The families need to go on. They need to walk on. I don't know how you do that.
Those words ring especially true for people like June Fisher.
My daughter-in-law knew 3 of them, so we're here for them. It's a sad thing, and you're not going to get over it in a hurry, that's for sure.
But Pastor Darius Pridgeon says today's example of solidarity will help a great deal.
For people to look beyond where someone lives or what their name is or what their background is, to get to the point of saying we're all people and the loss of life touches us all.
Even if most of whom attended the ceremony never knew those who are no longer with us.
One plane crash, 50 lives, but not just 50 lives, 50 unique souls.
Each represented by a rose placed in a vase before the altar by the brave firefighters who responded to the scene where they fell from the sky.
We've seen enough tears and heard enough cries of people to fill our sadness cup for a lifetime.
There is not a person aboard that flight 3407 that is not 1 or 2 degrees removed from a person that I know.
Days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
Well, victims' families, people in the neighborhood, even people who just watched this tragedy unfold on television, all are feeling a sense of grief.
And the ways of coping with this can vary, which is why we have invited Jen Henry from the Life Transition Center of Hospice to join us tonight. She's a grief counselor. So, Jen, we thank you for joining us. And, you know, what should people be feeling? People who really have no real connection to the tragedy. What are normal feelings?
I think everyone feels deeply about this. We all have experienced some sort of loss in our own lives. This is not unlike 9/11, other losses that our community and the nation has known. And so this reminds us that we're all vulnerable. You can't count on life always being the same from one day to the next.
And should you acknowledge the feelings that you have? That you may be angry even, you may be fearful, upset?
Angry, fearful, you may actually not have any feelings. Being numb, strange as it may sound, is also a response. But any of those, irritability, not being able to sleep, not eating, overeating, all of those.
You know, when the call first came in, it was said to be a small plane. Then Lisa Flynn was out at the scene. She told us that her sources said maybe 50 people could be dead. And then we found out as we stayed on during the night that Beverly Eckert was among those dead. And all of a sudden you find out it's someone you know, and it takes your breath away. And then that's the shock. And then as the time goes on, you really start feeling the pain and the suffering for her family, and for all the victims' families.
Yes, that's right. So it will change over time. And there's no right or wrong way to feel, no right or wrong way to grieve.
I'd like to know what you say to somebody. Now, I think each one of us in this community knows somebody somehow connected to this tragedy. If you know someone who lost a close loved one or someone they know on this plane, what should you say to them? Nobody knows what to say in these times.
You let them talk. You tell them you don't know how they're feeling. I mean, that's one thing sometimes we say, I know exactly how you're feeling. Yeah. Don't say that, because we don't. None of us do. You let them talk, share their feelings, and just be open and respectful. And I'm thinking of you. I care about you.
That means a lot, too. That for them to know that you really sincerely care about me and you're thinking about me. There's nothing you can do to bring the person back. But how does a person know if they're in such deep grief, if they need to seek professional help? What are the signs?
Initially, it's very normal, the things that we've talked about. But if these attitudes, outlooks on life, and so on continue for several weeks or several months, then it's time to begin to think about seeking help, where they're interfering with your life, where you're not able to sleep or you're always irritable, you can't go back to work. After a month or so, then it may be time to see someone.
Some time needs to pass here before you know if you're really in distress and you need counseling.
Yes, but you can still talk with someone now to help you through the crisis period.
Right. And having said that, we want to remind folks that we have Jen's coworkers. There are counselors standing by right now at the Life Transition Center. They are available to take your calls. The number is 836-6460. 836-6460 is the number for counselors, and they're there right now, and they'll be there till 8 o'clock.
And if you have young children in your family, stay tuned. In the next half hour, Jen will have some important tools for helping them cope as well.
Yeah, very important to talk to the kids about this, and we'll be talking to you in a little bit now, Jen. Thank you so much. Now, Hospice is also holding a special seminar to help this community cope with the tragedy of Flight 3407. This will take place on Wednesday, coming up this week, Wednesday from 5 to 6. And the Hospice Buffalo Education Center, this is located at Como Park Boulevard in Cheektowaga.
And Horizon Health Services is holding free support groups for the next 4 Saturdays from 9:30 to 10:30 in the morning. That's at the Boulevard Counseling Center. That's near Maple Road in the town of Tonawanda. And for more information, you can call 831-1800. You'll find all of this on our website. We'll also repeat it for you a little later in the program.
Well, the only 2 survivors of this terrible tragedy were on the ground.
Karen Walensky and her daughter Jill made it out of the burning house alive. Doug Walensky did not. Here's News 4's Lisa Flynn.
Happened to notice a little light on the right of me.
That tiny bit of light was Karen Walensky's ray of hope. She had survived the impact of the plane striking her Longstreet home in Clarence Center. Karen told WBEN Radio how she got out.
And then just kind of pushed what was on me, part of that off, and crawled out the hole.
Karen's 22-year-old daughter Jill was upstairs in the front of the house when the plane hit. She too miraculously survived and found an opening.
Can somebody get some help for my daughter? She was hysterical.
And when I got her, of course, she wanted to know where Doug was, and I didn't know. And to me, it looked like the plane just came down in the middle of the house, and unfortunately, that's where Doug was.
Karen's husband, 61-year-old Doug Walensky, did not make it out. Karen says Doug was in the dining room working on his beloved sports memorabilia when the plane hit. The Walenskys are well known in the Clarence School District, where Karen's a secretary. Doug, an engineer, is a Vietnam veteran.
He frequently came to the school to do lectures on Vietnam. The students were always enthralled to hear his lectures. Just a vibrant, good person.
And the Clarence community and the school's Federal Credit Union have set up a fund for the Walensky family. You can drop off your donations at the credit union office at 9145 Sheridan Drive in Clarence, or you can mail them to Post Office Box 657, Clarence, New York, 14031. Well, we all know that Buffalo's a hockey town, and Madeline Loftus loved ice hockey. In fact, she was on her way back to Buffalo for a reunion game with her old teammates at Buffalo State. As News 4's Joe Arena tells us, that game went on in her honor, and it will for years to come.
From the opening face-off to the final handshakes, this game wasn't about scoring goals. It was about a friend.
The reunion game from now on will be Maddie's game.
Madeline Lynn Loftus never made it to the game or had the chance to catch up with her friends and teammates this weekend. She was on Flight 3407. Her friends played the reunion game today, but with heavy hearts, and say there wasn't a moment Maddie wasn't on their minds, especially during the final minute.
All I could think of really was this final minutes for Maddie, and this is her game. And just go as hard as you can because she would be going as hard as she could.
Years earlier, while Maddie was still in high school in her hometown of New Jersey, Maddie proved how hard she could go by becoming the only girl on an all-boys hockey team.
Whether it was a boys' team or a girls' team, she was going to succeed. She would have been thoroughly disappointed if we hadn't played today. And I think it was great that we got out there and, you know, every other shift, I mean, she popped into my head the entire game, and I'm sure everybody else out there too.
Moments after the game, the players formed a circle, took a knee, and lit 10 candles for Maddie's number. They prayed, they cried, and as a group, held on to the little piece of Maddie left in all of them, as their task now is much more difficult than anything they could deal with at the office or on the ice.
Well, among the victims of the Continental crash, the entire crew, the flight crew of 4, and a young pilot who was off duty. They all shared a deep love of flying. The crew included Captain Marvin Renslow of Lutz, Florida, First Officer Rebecca Shaw from Maple Valley, Washington, and Matilda Quintero and Donna Prisco, flight attendants from New Jersey. 47-year-old Marvin Renslow, a husband and father from Lutz, Florida, was the pilot of Continental Flight 3407. Hours after the crash, his pastor spoke of his deep faith.
They want you to know that their faith is that God is sovereign, that God is in control even when it seems everything is out of control.
Next to the captain in the cockpit, 24-year-old First Officer Rebecca Shaw, who was married. Her family says she had a passion for flying.
She experienced love, she experienced passion, she experienced passion in life and in her career. She would walk in and everyone would be in smiles because you just couldn't help yourself because she was always so happy and so smiling, and she loved her husband so much.
Flight attendant 52-year-old Donna Prisco from Randolph, New Jersey, had been a stay-at-home mother of 4 before she fulfilled her lifelong dream of becoming a flight attendant last June. She trained as a flight attendant with 57-year-old Matilda Quintero, a breast cancer survivor who was also realizing her dream later in life.
And when she got her wings, she was really excited. She just loved it, absolutely loved it.
That's the common thread binding the crew of Flight 3407. Their family members say each was in the sky that night because flying was a profound passion. Each had worked hard to gain the wings of flight.
I've had the privilege of flying with her, and she was an amazing pilot. Absolutely amazing. We couldn't be prouder of her as a family.
And that off-duty crew member was Captain Joseph Zuffoletto.
Now, he didn't live here in Western New York at the time of the crash, but he had strong ties to the area. And he, too, will be sorely missed.
Chautauqua County Airport Manager Dave Sanctuary is mourning the loss of an old friend.
It's just an absolute shame to lose a gentleman, such a gentleman, so young in his life and so dedicated to his career.
Captain Joseph Zuffoletto was a native of San Diego, but was based out of the Jamestown Airport last year. Sanctuary says he'd often drop by to chat and check in on the weather. An aviation science graduate of Embry-Riddle University, Sanctuary says Zuffoletto got his pilot's license at 17.
You could tell that just from getting him to talk about an airplane, and he would just start to kind of glow.
When Zuffoletto was reassigned to the Newark airport, the 27-year-old would hop on a plane to see his grandmother in Buffalo.
I understand that he would fly there when he had a short time off, rather than trying to get all the way back to his home.
Friends of Zuffoletto in the area are working to organize a memorial service for a man who is said to have, quote, a heart of gold.
Joe was the epitome of what you look for in a pilot. He cared deeply about his professionalism. He cared deeply about doing the best job that he ever could do.
And that was News 4's Michelle McClintock. Ronald and Linda Davidson were returning to the Southern Tier after visiting a relative out of town. They dedicated their lives to helping others. And as Milas Hirstis tells us, the close-knit community that they called home will forever be grateful.
Ronald and Linda Davidson, a husband and wife, parents of 3, victims of the Flight 3407 tragedy.
It's a great grief for all of us. There's like a hole that I don't know if it'll get filled or not.
Sunday service at the couple's longtime spiritual home, St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Westfield.
We asked, where was God in all of this?
In this time of sorrow, faith is the pillar of strength that is helping family and friends cope.
God Take them to your heart and love them.
The Davidsons were returning home on Flight 3407 after visiting their daughter.
It was very nice that they had seen all their children just before they left.
Linda was a nurse for 25 years. The Davidsons are remembered for giving back to their community. You see, their calling went beyond Sunday services.
Ron was a volunteer in the soup kitchen on Thursdays. Good, very funny man. And she would come in once a month to take the blood pressure of the clients in the soup kitchen that would come in, and just awful nice people.
On Sunday, a chance for the community to remember and find answers in their beliefs.
To remember is instead of pulling things apart, it's putting things back together the way they're meant to be.
A husband and wife, parents, friends.
It's right for us to grieve. We know where they are, but we miss them.
And looking forward to visiting relatives in Toronto, a father, a mother, their only child, and his aunt, boarded Flight 3407.
The 4 members of the Mossop family of Bloomfield, New Jersey, had delayed their vacation until they could get time off from work and school. Donald and Dawn Mossop, 12-year-old Sean, and Dawn's sister Ferris were active church members.
They were God-fearing, loving, caring people. The type of people you would really want as friends.
Well, 2 other members of the Mossop family were supposed to take that flight, but they decided to stay behind.
And 2 other passengers from New Jersey were heading to Buffalo to share their musical talents with Western New Yorkers.
News 4's Tricia Cruz has their stories tonight.
Coleman Millette was a 33-year-old musician from New Jersey who just released his first CD in 2007. This VHS tape shows guitarist Clay Yarber in a blue shirt back in the 1980s. Back then, he was playing at a Coachman Park concert in Clearwater when he played for Power Play. He went on to play at the Ringside Cafe in St. Petersburg with a band called Taxi. Ron Reinhardt, a friend and fellow musician, says music was Yarber's passion.
Clay was an excellent musician. Excellent. Had a good reputation in the area.
Some say he focused on music because of his traumatic experience in Vietnam.
Clay was the most macho guy in the world. He was a decorated Vietnam War grunt. I mean, he saw it all. Clay saw it all. And, I mean, there's nothing worse that anyone has seen that Clay hadn't seen. And he was wounded a couple times. And I think his helicopters crashed a couple times.
Since then, Yarber didn't like flying, but he did it anyway. On Thursday, he was one of 49 passengers who died when the commuter plane crashed in Clarence Center.
Let me tell you something, what Clay said once. He said, he should be dead. He said he should have died in Vietnam. So everything since then has been gravy.
Reinhardt says Yarber didn't worry about the small things after his close calls with death. He became a free spirit who lived through his music. His music will now live on without him.
And the beat goes on.
So many stories here.
Yeah, really. Well, families of the victims were allowed to visit the crash site today for the very first time.
And after they left, some members of the media were also allowed in. News 4's George Rickert spoke with some of these media witnesses today. George?
Yeah, very few of even the media have been allowed in. As you see, the perimeter is still strictly enforced here. Most of us are kept a few blocks away. But here's a perspective from a few who have seen it up close.
I visited the site on a daily basis. I've seen it transformed from a fireball in its first few minutes to a smoldering pile to a cold pile, and now the teardown of that pile and the analysis of it. Still to this day, I'm amazed at the compressed area that it's encompassing. It's a very small piece of property. And then to have this huge tail section sticking out of the ground is just it's staggering. It's amazing.
Mostly saw just what looked to be a pile of like dirt and rubble. We heard the word methodical from a lot of the investigators, and that is exactly what I saw. They are going literally shovel by shovel. It's absolutely surreal, amazing to see, we keep saying over and over and over again, this plane hit one home, just one home. And to see that, the most amazing part of it all was the steps to the front door, still in place, still intact, charred and burned, but still in place where they were when this plane went down.
That is the last place, their loved ones were when they were on this earth. So, like I said, thinking of myself, I understand what significance that location has. It's significant in that 25 years as a trooper, and I've seen a lot of things and investigated a lot of even fatal motor vehicle accidents or things like that, tragedies that have occurred that have involved people, and the magnitude of this one makes it different, and you'll never forget it. My troopers will never forget it.
It really does leave an impression on anybody who sees it, a different impression for everybody. And again, it's hard to say just what impression or whether it provided much closure at all for the family. But they spent a good hour on site, and we could see them from a distance moving by, carrying flowers. They threw flowers over a fence, as even though there was maybe not much to see anymore, at least represented the place where their loved ones spent their final seconds.
Well, George, I think for Major Cummings to say that all the years that he's been a state trooper and what he's seen, that he's never seen anything like this tragedy.
Exactly, and I think the same could be said here in the media. I mean, I've certainly never covered a story that has affected so many people locally like this, and I'm sure you could say that, the same thing. Just it impacts everybody differently, even if you didn't know somebody well who was on that flight. It's Buffalo. Everybody knows somebody who knew somebody on that flight.
George, I want to ask you, the NTSB investigator has been talking about their removing pieces of the plane from the scene and have already removed a good portion of it. Are you seeing any trucks going by or any of that wreckage as it's leaving that area?
No, we haven't. I mean, we see construction vehicles moving in and out, not often, not necessarily trucks that might have a giant covered piece of wreckage, nothing like that. And we have been here all day. It's mostly just standard construction trucks. Of course, in the middle of the day, they paused all the work for the families. But I think they're really trying to respect the privacy of all of it and covering whatever they take away. We don't see dumpsters. We don't see any open things like that. And while I'm at it, although we're being kept a few blocks away here, Dave Bissonette, the emergency coordinator for Clarence, is estimating that by this weekend, possibly all the streets will be open by this weekend. He says possibly, except for maybe just that one block with the house in question.
Well, George, you spent all day in Clarence, and I was just wondering, what's the demeanor of the residents out there? They've been dealing with this since last Thursday night.
They believe it's being handled well. At least the few I talked to made a point of saying how well they think that the authorities are handling this. And, we weren't treated like we're a nuisance, as, sometimes you worry about disrupting the privacy of, we're right next to houses here, but we have been taken well here, and I've heard no complaints of the way any of this has been run.
All right, George Rickert, we appreciate your observations from the scene tonight. Thank you.
And as you can imagine, firefighters were among the first to respond to the fiery crash scene.
Now, George spoke with a first responder who says the images that he saw Thursday night will be with him for the rest of his life.
We had a job to do, and we wanted to go and get it done.
But volunteer firefighter Wayne Mahalik says nothing could have prepared him for a sight like the crash of Flight 3407. He drove one of the ambulances for the town of Newstead to the scene that night. They quickly learned there were no survivors.
And when you're trained to help somebody and you can't help them.
But like most firefighters, he didn't think twice about going back the next day to help with the recovery efforts. He shared the photos with us that he took from what he calls Ground Zero.
Even now, almost 3 days after the crash, there is still a perimeter set up, keeping the public and the media a few blocks away from the actual crash scene. That's why Wayne's pictures bring us all that much closer to what most of us haven't seen.
Like the way the trees are sliced in such a way to almost show the path the plane took on the way down, or the landing gear that sticks out from atop the scene.
There's been those thoughts, why am I doing this? Why do I put myself in this situation? But that's There's more to life than just living it for yourself. I mean, we're all humans. We're meant to help each other. Firefighters are human too.
And Jen Henry, who is a grief therapist from the Life Transition Center, is here with us again. Jen, let's talk about those first responders. They've got to be dealing with a lot now that they realize if they saw that ball of fire and then what was happening inside.
Absolutely. The concentric circle, I mean, it's like a ripple. Those people that responded initially all the way out to people just living on the streets in the neighborhoods in that community, and then on out to the larger community and the nation.
So you would expect those first on the scene perhaps to be most affected, even though, you know, as we heard Major Cummings from the state police say, they see, you know, death, they see violence on a regular basis, but they've never seen anything like this.
Not to the magnitude of this. I mean, something like this that is so unexpected, a plane dropping from the sky, is just, there's no way that people prepare for this. Mm-hmm. And so it just is very distressing.
And yet, you know, through the years, we've never, up until this point, had a commercial aviation disaster in Western New York. But these first responders continue to have drill after drill through the years. And I don't care how many drills you have. I think when you come across the real McCoy, it must hit you like a ton of bricks. This is it. We got a job to do, but then you realize the emotional toll of what's going on to the victims.
Yeah. And that's not going to go away. I mean, that I hope people know that that's going to stay and need attention for months and perhaps years. Yeah, and counseling may very much be in order for some folks here. Yes. Now, let's talk about children, because they see it on television. They're hearing about it in school. A lot of them have parents who fly, or they have been on airplanes, or they even have airplanes flying over their house. How are children to deal with this? Well, I think the first thing we really ought to talk about is let's limit their exposure to some of the stories and some of the discussions. I mean, as this unfolds, it may be quite inappropriate to have them know some of the details that are available. But on the other hand, having said that, it's important that when we do talk to them, we are clear and concise, confident with what we know and what we don't know, and give them accurate information in ways that they can understand. And I agree with you. The news is not for children, and for small children, don't let them sit there and soak it up. But Jen, we want to thank you so much, and we want to remind folks, because we've been talking about counseling, that we have grief counselors standing by right now. They'll be on the phones up until 8 o'clock tonight. They're at the Life Transition Center, and they are available to take calls at 836-6460. Jen, we thank you so much. The number again is 836-6460.
Then on Wednesday, hospice is holding a special seminar to help this community cope with the tragedy of Flight 3407. It will take place from 5 to 6 at the Hospice Buffalo Education Center. That's on Como Park Boulevard in Cheektowaga. No one needs to register. You can just literally walk in. And we'd like to let you know that Horizon Health Services is holding free support groups for the next 4 Saturdays from 9:30 to 10:30 at the Boulevard Counseling Center. This is near Maple Road in the town of Tonawanda. For more information, you may call 831-1800. You'll find all of this on our website, WIVB.com. And as Western New Yorkers work through their grief, federal investigators continue their search for answers. For more on that now, we're going to head to Amherst and to our News 4 investigative reporter, Luke Moretti. Luke?
Well, the reality is it could take many months before we know what caused this horrific plane crash. Investigators continue searching for answers, and that includes talking to pilots who were flying in the area that night.
We want to ask them what icing they experienced, what flight conditions they experienced, and so forth. So we're putting out these questionnaires. We're putting them out to dispatchers. We're going to go out and start doing interviews of the accident dispatcher and other folks involved with this. And this is, again, a process that's going to take place over the next several weeks.
Now, as investigators try to put together the pieces of the puzzle, they're looking at a lot of different factors, and that includes icing. Flight 3407's trip to Buffalo appears to be uneventful until its final 26 seconds. We now know that 11 minutes after takeoff from Newark, the pilot in control turned on the aircraft's de-icing system.
He left it on the remainder of the flight. This is a very sophisticated de-icing system on the Q400.
And he had it on properly, and it was working properly as far as we can, determine.
When the crew left Newark, the weather was light to moderate icing in the Buffalo area. The visibility was 3 miles with snow in light mist.
It was really not a bad weather day, and they chose to launch.
But recordings analyzed by investigators indicate the crew had commented about significant ice buildup on the plane's windshield and wings. We know the plane was on autopilot, but was turned off when the plane's stall prevention system kicked in. At that point, a terrifying sequence of events begins to unfold as the aircraft gyrates wildly.
It rolled to the left 46 degrees, and then it rolled back to the right 105 degrees.
Investigators say the turboprop plunged rapidly, falling 800 feet in 5 seconds. The pull inside the cabin was twice the force of gravity. As for how icing on the wings and windshield affected the pilot's ability to control it in the final minutes is still unclear. However, the NTSB recommends that the autopilot be disengaged in icing conditions.
So that you have the manual feel for what might be changing in your flight regime because of the ice.
But the FAA, which regulates aviation, has not yet made that recommendation a hard, fast rule.
To say that they should not have been flying on autopilot is not correct. I mean, it's up to the airlines, it's up to the FAA. It has not been become a rule yet that you will disengage the autopilot.
The NTSB's Steve Cheelander says several airlines have changed their procedures when it comes to icing. What does the manufacturer of this particular aircraft say about that?
The only restriction that they see, the manufacturer of this airplane, and that they write about is that disengage the autopilot in severe icing conditions.
But severe icing is something investigators haven't found yet, based on pilot reports from other airplanes. Now, investigators are hoping to be finished at the crash site in Clarence by Wednesday afternoon. They're hoping to get done before a big storm moves into the area, but they say they'll stay as long as they have to. And once again, a final determination on this won't be known for many months to come. We're live in Amherst tonight. Luke Moretti, News 4.
All right, thank you, Luke. And one way or another, this tragedy has had an impact on every person who calls Western New York home.
That is so true. If you would like to send your condolences to the victims' families, you can do so on our website, WIVB.com. You'll also find more information there about support groups and other places where you can turn for help dealing with such devastation.
And we want to thank you for joining us tonight as we remember the 50 extraordinary people who have touched so many lives.
We're going to leave you now with the angelic sounds of the Clarence Senior High School Chorus and the lasting images of a tragedy that has united this community and changed so many lives.
3407, 3 miles from Clump, turn left, heading 260, maintain 2,300 till established, localized and cleared out, approach runway 23.
Left 260, 2,300 till established and cleared out, 23, approach code 3407.
Can somebody get some help for my daughter? She's been hysterical. Oh my gosh, is there anybody in there? No.